On a wild stormy night, the wind clawed at the trees and rain hammered against the windows of a small lonely cottage, standing at the edge of a desolate road. Inside the fire, crackled weakly shadows, leapt and twisted across the walls, and three figures sat close together. Mr. White, with his tired eyes, bent over a chessboard opposite his cheerful son Herbert, who mocked his every move, and Mrs. White, quietly knitting in her chair, trying to ignore the sound of the storm that seemed to whisper through the cracks of the house. Mr. White cursed his luck as his king was trapped again. Herbert laughed, teasing his father, while the storm outside grew fiercer, every thunderclap shaking the house, until suddenly there came a knock at the door, slow, heavy, deliberate, a knock that cut through the storm like a dreadful omen. When the door creaked open, a tall figure stepped inside, Sergeant Major Morris, an old soldier, his boots dripping water, his eyes shadowed, as if carrying memories too heavy for one man to bear. He warmed himself by the fire, and spoke in a voice low and weary of his travels in faraway lands, and of strange charms and darker magics. Then with trembling hands he drew from his pocket a shriveled monkey's paw. The sight of it made Mrs. White recoil. Herbert laughed, nervously calling it a witch's talisman, but Morris's voice grew grim as he explained that a fakir had cursed the paw to prove that fate ruled men's lives. It would grant 3 wishes, 3 only, but each wish would twist itself into horror and ruin. He spoke of men destroyed by greed, of families torn apart by their own desires, and as his voice deepened the storm outside seemed to echo his words with louder howls. Desperate to warn them, Morris, in fear, hurled the paw into the fire, but Mr. White, his curiosity burning, snatched it out despite Morris's shout of warning, and that night when the soldier had gone the family sat staring at the paw on the table. Herbert teased his father, daring him to use it, while Mrs. White, half in jest half in dread, asked what they would wish for with a nervous laugh. Mr. White held the paw and whispered his wish for £200, enough to free them of debt. The paw writhed in his hand, its fingers curling like something alive. Mrs. White gasped. Herbert laughed uneasily, but nothing happened. The night dragged on with uneasy silence, yet in the morning sunlight things felt strangely normal. Herbert joked about searching for their money under the bed, and the family laughed though uneasily until there came another knock at the door, this one timid and sorrowful. A well-dressed man stood outside, hat in hand, his face pale as the grave, his voice faltering as he delivered his dreadful message. Herbert had been caught in the factory machinery, the details too terrible to speak aloud. He was gone forever, and though the company sent £200 in compensation, the money was as cold and heavy as the coffin that would soon carry their boy. Mrs. White screamed in despair, her heart torn apart, while Mr. White sat frozen, staring at the cursed paw on the table, his hands shaking. Shadows in the room lengthened, mocking their grief. Days passed in suffocating sorrow. The house grew darker, filled only with sobs and silence, until one night Mrs. White, wild with grief, seized her husband by the arm, demanding that he use the paw again, that he bring Herbert back to her arms. Though Mr. White protested, trembling in terror at the thought, she forced him to raise the paw, and with a broken whisper he wished his son alive again. The fire sputtered low, the wind outside stilled, and the silence grew so deep it felt as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then came the sound, faint at first, then louder, the dragging of feet, the thud of something unnatural moving closer, until finally a thunderous knock rattled the door. Again and again the cottage shook with each blow. Mrs. White cried with joy, convinced her boy had returned. She fumbled desperately at the lock, while Mr. White, frozen in horror, imagined the twisted, mangled corpse of his son risen from the grave, pounding at their door. The knocking grew faster, harder, furious, as if the dead demanded entry. Mrs. White screamed, struggling with the bolt, while Mr. White, drenched in sweat, clutched the paw one last time, and with all his strength made his final desperate wish that the thing outside the door would vanish forever. At that very moment the door burst open, the storm wind swept inside, and the night lay empty. Nothing stood outside, no sun, no shadow, only darkness and silence. Mrs. White collapsed to the floor, wailing in despair, while Mr. White dropped the cursed paw, which curled into a tight fist, as though mocking them. The fire flickered out, leaving the house in cold, eternal darkness, where only the echo of the knocking seemed to linger in their minds forever.